Ian Brady and Myra Hindley are two of Britain's most notorious serial killers. In the 1960s, they would roam the streets of Manchester, abducting children, then taking them to the moors, where they would sexually assault and murder them and bury their bodies. This is Enter the Dark. Hello and welcome to Enter the Dark. I am Jan from Film Daddy, and with me as always, but far away this time, is Les from Tales from the Hangman. How's it going, Les?
It's going good. It's going good here in the old quarantine household. Yeah, fun times.
Yeah, as you all know, and if you don't, I really don't know what you've been doing. We are in lockdown, so this is why I'm in my house, Les is in his. And because Les is a Luddite, he doesn't own a computer. So I'm calling him on Skype on his phone. So that's why he does sound like he's on his phone. Don't you, Les?
Yeah. I'm on my phone, don't own a computer. I usually cast the runes for information. That's a thing I do. Information.
Well, I have bullied him into buying a PC, so he will... If this does go on for a few more months, he will sound a bit better than this. So apologies for that. But first of all, before we get going, I just have to say a massive thank you to everyone who watches our channel, because since our last video went out, the Sylvia Likens video, everything's gone a bit crazy. We've smashed... Views have gone sky high. That at the moment is on 1,700 views. We've got over 5,000 channel views now, and we're sitting on currently 149 subscribers. So thank you so much for that. It validates what we're doing, that you like it, and thank you. We will carry on. But enough of pulling ourselves off here. Let's get straight into this today. Now, this is one that Les has been banging on at me since we started this channel to do. He's always wanted to do the Moors murders. So
I thought it was the Charles Wharton case.
No, Charles Wharton's next, if you're a good boy. But this is the Moors murders. Now, we're English, so this is like when we were growing up, even in the 80s, 90s, this was big news. Obviously, they always stayed in the news. So let's just crack on with it straight away. What do you think, Les?
Yeah, it's good with me. It's good with me. Even though it's not Charles Wharton, it's an interesting and harrowing case.
Yeah, let's get stepping in straight away. Ian Brady was born in Rotten Row Maternity Hospital in Glasgow to Margaret Peggy Stewart and grew up in the tough slum neighbourhood of the Gorbals. Peggy Stewart, a tea room waitress, found it difficult bringing up a child on her own and hoped to spare her son the social stigma of illegitimacy. So she gave up young Ian to the nearby Sloane family, who adopted him into their own family and raised him as one of their own. Ian's father has never been identified. Peggy Stewart claimed that he was a journalist who died a few months before their son was born. Early on, Ian showed troubling signs of dysfunctional behaviour and moodiness. When he could not have his way, he would throw violent tantrums, which sometimes ended with him banging his head against the wall. Peggy occasionally came to visit her son and indulged him with gifts. Ian soon figured out for himself who Peggy Stewart really was, and likewise deduced that the Sloanes were not his real family. Others in the neighbourhood also caught on to the boy's socially unacceptable origins, and this, coupled with his sullen, unsociable personality and his lack of skill at football, made him unpopular with the local children. Ian Sloane, as he was then called, came to resent his illegitimacy and began to see himself as a rebellious outsider, not bound by the same rules as others. So, lack of skill at football in Glasgow is going to be a big thing, because you've got Rangers and Celtic, so... Obviously, when you're a young lad, if you're no good at football, you're an outcast.
Do we know if he supported, who he supported?
I don't know. It doesn't say.
I think it's irrelevant.
It probably is irrelevant, isn't it, who he supported? At school, he was a bright student and a handsome, well-dressed boy, but not well-liked. At the age of 11, Ian passed the entrance exams to Shawlands Academy. His potential was never realised. However, as he was lazy, would not apply himself, and misbehaved. He started smoking and virtually gave up on schoolwork. He developed a fascination with Nazi Germany. Nazi pageantry and Nazi symbolism. He often asked other boys for souvenirs that their fathers brought back from the war, and when playing roughhouse war games, he would insist on being the German. It was at this time that Ian became known for perverse and sadistic tendencies, including bullying smaller children and torturing animals in a variety of grotesque ways. By the time he was a teenager, he had been brought before the juvenile courts for incidents of burglary and housebreaking. On the first 2 occasions, he was given probation, but on the third, he was deemed incorrigible, and the court ordered him to leave Glasgow and live with his mother. That's something he's like, get out of Glasgow.
Yeah.
You've got to be bad if you're being kicked out of Glasgow for breaking in houses.
Yeah, that is pretty bad. Like, you're a bit much for us, lad. Off the trot.
I mean, on the scale of things that happen in Glasgow, that's down there, but, he was ordered to leave Glasgow. That's weird. She had since moved to Manchester and had married an Irish labourer named Patrick Brady. In November 1954, 2 months before his 17th birthday, Ian left the Sloane household and travelled down to join his mother and her new husband. Although he did not get along with Mr. Brady, Ian took his stepfather's name and used it for his own. As a Scot exiled in an English city, Ian Brady's compounded feelings of isolation and hostility began to manifest in other ways. He would often spend hours in his room, reading and listening to music. He developed an interest in the writings of the Marquis de Sade and Friedrich Nietzsche, focusing particular attention on Nietzsche's theories of Übermensch and the will to power. He became increasingly enamoured of a philosophy that championed cruelty and torture, and the idea that superior creatures had the right to control and destroy, if necessary, weaker ones. Brady avidly collected books about torture and sadomasochism and other paraphernalias relating to domination and servitude. About this time, he worked as a butcher's assistant, and some commentators have surmised that the experience of regularly cutting meat away from the bone may have nurtured his growing interest in the physical acts of mutilation and murder. He also began drinking heavily and frequenting the cinema, and often found himself in need of extra spending money to support these new habits. Brady also gambled on horse races. The young man soon resorted again to thieving. After being convicted several more times, plus being arrested and fined for an incident of public drunkenness, he was sentenced to 2 years training at Borstal School, as well as a spell at Strangeways Prison. While incarcerated, Brady learned illegal techniques for acquiring money and entertained grandiose fantasies of becoming a big-time criminal, pulling off lucrative bank heists. He hoped to avoid manual labour and aimed to appear respectable, and so studied bookkeeping. His release led to prolonged stretches of unemployment. He found work as a labourer for Boddington's Brewery between April and October 1958, before spending a few more months unemployed. Brady eventually found a job in 1959 as a stock clerk at Millward's Merchandising. Almost 2 years later, in 1961, he met Myra Hindley. Now, Myra Hindley, who was born on the 23rd of July 1942, was brought up in Gorton, then a working-class area of Manchester. The daughter of Nellie and Bob Hindley, her mother, an alcoholic father, beat her regularly as a child. The small house the family lived in was in such poor condition that Hindley and her parents had to sleep in the only available bedroom. She in a single bed next to her parents' double. The family's living conditions deteriorated further when Hindley's sister Maureen was born in 1946. Shortly after the birth, Hindley, then aged 5, was sent by her parents to live with her grandmother, who lived nearby. Hindley's father had fought in North Africa, Cyprus and Italy during the Second World War, and had served with the Parachute Regiment. He had been known in the army as a hard man, and he expected his daughter to be equally tough. He taught her how to fight, and insisted that she stick up for herself. When Hindley was 8, a local boy approached her in the street and scratched both of her cheeks with his fingernails, drawing blood. She burst into tears and ran to her parents' house, to be met by her father, who demanded that she go and punch the boy, because if you don't, I'll leather you. Hindley found the boy and succeeded in knocking him down with a sequence of punches, as her father had taught her. As she wrote later, at 8 years old, I scored my first victory. Hindley's first job was a junior clerk at a local electrical engineering firm. She ran errands, made tea, and typed. She was well liked at the firm, enough so that when she lost her first week's wage packet, the other girls had a collection to replace it. She had a short relationship with Ronnie Sinclair from Christmas 1958 and became engaged at age 17. The engagement was called off several months later. Hindley apparently thought Sinclair immature and unable to provide her with the life she envisioned for herself. Shortly after her 17th birthday, she changed her hair colour with a pink rinse. She took judo lessons once a week at a local school, but found partners reluctant to train with her, as she was often slow to release her grip. She took a job at Brady and Hinchcliffe, an engineering company in Gorton, but was sacked for absenteeism after 6 months. As a typist beginning that month, she was the newest employee at Millwards. Though she had a rough childhood, Hindley showed no warning signs that she would hint towards her future. But unlike her co-workers, she took an immediate liking to Brady. For nearly 12 months, however, he remained disinterested and aloof, whereas she liked him enormously. But at the Christmas office party, relaxed by a few drinks, Brady asked Hindley for a date. They went to the cinema, where they watched a film about the Nuremberg trials. Their dates followed a regular pattern: trip to the cinema, usually to watch an X-rated film, then back to Hindley's house to drink German wine. Brady then gave her reading material, and the pair spent work lunch breaks reading aloud to one another from accounts of Nazi atrocities. Hindley began to emulate an ideal Aryan perfection, bleaching her hair blonde and applying thick crimson lipstick. The relationship between Brady and Hindley developed in concert with Brady's increasingly rabid identification with Nazi-era atrocities and his growing sadomasochistic sexual appetite. Hindley was Brady's eager student. Under his influence, she stopped going to church and started hating children. Soon after they became a couple, Brady and Hindley began planning a series of bank robberies, which they never carried out. When Brady became fascinated with the idea of rape and murder for sexual gratification, Hindley actively participated in procuring child victims, as well as sexually abusing, torturing and murdering them. With the aid of a time delay camera and self-devised darkroom, Brady and Hindley set about taking photographs of themselves acting out sadomasochistic fantasies. They later took pictures of each other standing or kneeling at the moorland burial sites of their victims. Apparently, one of their earliest ambitions was to crack the illicit amateur pornography market, selling obscene photographs of their bizarre sexual antics with each other, but for whatever reason, this enterprise failed. Hindley claimed that Brady began to talk about committing the perfect murder in July 1963, and often spoke to her about Mayor Levin's Compulsion, published in 1956. The novel, a fictionalized account of the Leopold and Loeb case, tells of two young men from well-to-do families who attempt to carry out the perfect murder of a 12-year-old boy and who escape the death penalty because of their age. On July 12, 1963, the couple claimed their first victim. 16-year-old Pauline Reed was enticed into Hindley's minivan while Brady followed behind on his motorcycle. They drove up to Saddleworth Moors, where Hindley asked Pauline to help her look for a lost glove. They were busy searching the moors when Brady pounced upon Pauline and raped her. He then smashed her skull in with the shovel and slashed her throat so violently that she was almost decapitated. On November 23rd, Hindley lured 12-year-old John Kilbride into her car from a marketplace in Ashton-under-Lyne and drove him to Saddleworth Moor. Brady was waiting there and ordered Hindley to wait for him in a nearby village in their hired Ford Anglia. While Hindley waited in her car, Brady attempted to stab the boy with a knife, but the weapon was too blunt. Brady lost his temper and strangled him to death with a string before burying his body in a shallow grave. On June 16, 1964, their third victim was another 12-year-old boy, Keith Bennet, whom they enticed from a street in Chorlton and drove to Saddleworth Moor. Hindley stood and watched from the top of an embankment while Brady sexually assaulted Keith in a ravine before strangling him to death with a piece of string and burying his body. This is the body that has never been found. The fourth victim was 10-year-old Leslie Ann Downey, and she was lured from a fairground in Ancoats. Brady took 9 obscene photographs of her, showing her naked, bound and gagged, which were later found in a suitcase in the left luggage locker. Hindley recorded the scene of the child's rape and torture by Brady on audio tape. The tape clearly records the voices of Brady, Hindley and the child, who was heard to scream and protest and asked to be allowed to go home and plead for her life. It is believed that she was killed by Brady. The following morning, Brady and Hindley drove Leslie's body to Saddleworth Moor, where it was buried in a shallow grave. On October the 6th, 1965, The couple claimed their fifth and final victim, 17-year-old Edward Evans. They enticed him from Manchester Central Railway Station to their house in Hattersley, where Hindley's 18-year-old brother-in-law David Smith was visiting. Brady then crept up on Edward in the kitchen and smashed his head in with an axe. He ordered Smith to help him carry the corpse to an upstairs bedroom and tie it up ready for disposal. Smith agreed to meet Brady the following evening to dispose of Evans' body, but after returning home he woke his wife and told her what he had seen. Maureen told him that he must call the police. 3 hours later, the couple cautiously made their way to a public phone box in the street below their flat, Smith taking the precaution of arming himself with a screwdriver and a kitchen knife to defend them in the event that Brady suddenly appeared and confronted them. At 6:07 a.m, Smith made an emergency services call to the police station in nearby Hyde and told his story to the officer on duty. In his statement to the police, Smith claimed that Brady opened the door and he said in a very loud voice for him, "Do you want those miniatures?" I nodded my head to say yes, and he led me into the kitchen. He gave me 3 miniature bottles of spirits and said, "Do you want the rest?" When I first walked into the house, the door to the living room was closed. Ian went into the living room and I waited in the kitchen. I waited for about a minute or two, then suddenly I heard a hell of a scream. It sounded like a woman, really high-pitched. Then the screams carried on, one after another, really loud. Then I heard Myra shout, "Dave, help him," very loud. When I ran in, I just stood inside the living room door and I saw a young lad. He was lying with his head and shoulders on the couch and his legs were on the floor. He was facing upwards. Ian was standing over him, facing him, with his legs on either side of the young lad's legs. The lad was still screaming. He had a hatchet in his hand, Ian did. He was holding it above his head and he hit the lad on the left side of his head with the hatchet. I heard the blow. It was a terrible hard blow and it sounded horrible. Early on the morning of 7th of October, shortly after Smith's call, Superintendent Bob Talbot of the Cheshire Police arrived at the back door of 16 Wardlebrook Avenue, wearing a borrowed baker's overall to cover his uniform. Talbot identified himself to Hindley as a police officer, and when she opened the door, told her that he wanted to speak to her boyfriend. Hindley led him into the living room where Brady was sitting up in a divan writing a note to his employer explaining that he would not be able to get into work because of an ankle injury. Talbot explained that he was investigating an act of violence involving guns that was reported to have taken place the previous evening. Hindley denied that there had been any violence and allowed the police to look around the house. When they came to the upstairs room in which Evans' body was stored, the police found the door locked and asked Brady for the key. Hindley claimed that the key was at work, but after the police officer offered to drive her to the employer's premises to retrieve it, Brady told her to hand over the key. When they returned to the living room and the police told Brady that they had discovered a trussed-up body and that he was being arrested on suspicion of murder, as Brady got dressed, he said, "Eddie and I had a row and the situation got out of hand." Hindley was not arrested with Brady, but she demanded to go with him to the police station, accompanied by her dog Puppet, to which the police agreed. Hindley was questioned about the events surrounding Evans' death, but she refused to make any statement beyond claiming that it had been an accident. As the police had no evidence that Hindley was involved in Evans' murder, she was allowed to go home, on condition that she returned the next day for further questioning. Hindley was at liberty for 4 days following Brady's arrest, during which time she went to her employer's premises and asked to be dismissed, so that she will be eligible for unemployment benefits. While in the office where Brady worked, she found some papers belonging to him in an envelope that she claimed she did not open, which she burned in an ashtray instead. She believed that they were plans for bank robberies, nothing to do with the murders. On October the 11th, Hindley was charged as an accessory to the murder of Edward Evans and was remanded at Risley. Brady admitted under police questioning that he and Evans had fought, but insisted that he and Smith had murdered Evans between them. Hindley, he said, had only done what she had been told. Smith told the police that Brady and Hindley had hidden evidence in 2 suitcases stored in a left luggage office somewhere in Manchester. The British Transport Police were asked to search all of Manchester's stations, and on the 15th of October found what they were looking for. Police later found the left luggage ticket in the back of Hindley's prayer book. Inside one of the cases were 9 pornographic photos taken of a young girl, naked and with a scarf tied across her mouth, and a 13-minute tape recording of her screaming and pleading for help. Anne Downey, Leslie Ann Downey's mother, later listened to the tape after the police had discovered the body of her missing 10-year-old daughter and confirmed that it was a recording of her daughter's voice. How harrowing must that be?
That's horrible. That's horrible, isn't it? Like, yeah, that's my daughter.
I can't even contemplate how horrible that must be for the poor mother to hear a daughter pleading for her life.
As parents, it's unbelievable, isn't it? It's just horrific.
Police searching the house at Waldlebrook Avenue also found an old exercise book which the name John Kilbride had been scribbled, which made them suspicious that Brady and Hindley may have been involved in some unsolved disappearances of other youngsters. A large collection of photographs was discovered in the house, many of which seemed to be taken on Saddleworth Moor. 150 officers were drafted to search the moor, looking for locations that matched the photographs. Initially, the search was concentrated along the A628 road near the Woodhead, but a close neighbour, 11-year-old Pat Hodges, had on several occasions been taken to the moor by Brady and Hindley, and she was able to point out their favourite sites along the A635 road. On 16th of October, police found an arm bone sticking out of the pit. Officers presumed they found the body of John Kilbride, but soon discovered that the body was that of Leslie Ann Downey. Ann Downey, later Ann West after her marriage to Alan West, had been on the moor watching as the police conducted their search, but was not present when the body was found. She was shown clothing recovered from the grave and identified it as belonging to her missing daughter. Detectives were able to locate another site on the opposite side of the A635 road from where Downey's body was discovered, and 5 days later they found the badly decomposed body of John Kilbride, whom they identified by his clothing. That same day, already being held for the murder of Evans, Brady and Hindley appeared at Hyde Magistrates Court, charged with Leslie Ann Downey's murder. Each was brought before the court separately and remanded into custody for a week. They made a 2-minute appearance on the 28th of October and again were remanded into custody. The search for bodies continued, but with the winter setting in, it was called off in November. Presented with the evidence of the tape recording, Brady admitted to taking the photographs of Leslie Ann Downey, but insisted she had been brought to Waldlebrook Avenue by 2 men who had subsequently taken her away again alive. Brady was further charged with the murder of John Kilbride and Hindley the murder of Edward Evans on December the 2nd. At the committal hearing on 6th of December, Brady was charged with the murder of Edward Evans, John Kilbride and Leslie Ann Downey, and Hindley with the murders of Edward Evans and Leslie Ann Downey, as well as harbouring Brady in the knowledge that he had killed John Kilbride. The prosecution's opening statement was held in camera, and the defence asked for similar stipulation, but was refused. The proceedings continued in front of 3 magistrates in Hyde over an 11-day period during December, at the end of which the pair were committed for trial at Chester Assizes. Many of the photographs taken by Brady and Hindley on the moor featured Hindley's dog Puppet, sometimes as a puppy. Detectives arranged for the animal to be examined by a vet to determine its age, which they could date when the pictures were taken. The examination involved analysis of the dog's teeth, which required a general anaesthetic from which Puppet did not recover, as he suffered from an undiagnosed kidney complaint. On hearing the news of her dog's death, Hindley became furious and accused the police of murdering Puppet. The trial was held over 14 days, beginning on the 19th of April 1966, in front of Mr. Justice Fenton Atkinson. Such was the public interest that the courtroom was fitted with security screens to protect Brady and Hindley. The pair were each charged with 3 murders, those of Evans, Downey and Kilbride, as it was considered that there was only then sufficient evidence to implicate Hindley in Kilbride's death. The prosecution was led by the Attorney General Frederick Elwyn Jones. Brady was defended by the Liberal Member of Parliament Emmeline Hewson, and Hindley was defended by Godfrey Heilpern, Recorder of Salford from 1964, both experienced QCs. David Smith was the chief prosecution witness, but during the trial it was revealed that he had entered into an agreement with a newspaper that he initially refused to name, even under intense questioning, guaranteeing him £1,000, equivalent to around about £15,000 now, for syndication rights to his story if Brady and Hindley were convicted, something the trial judge described as gross interference with the course of justice. Smith finally admitted in court that the newspaper was News of the World, which had already paid for a holiday in France for him and his wife and was paying him a regular income of £20 a week, as well as accommodating him in a 5-star hotel for the duration of the trial. Brady and Hindley pleaded not guilty to the charges against them. Both were called to give evidence, Brady for over 8 hours and Hindley for 6. Although Brady admitted to hitting Evans with an axe, he did not admit to killing him, arguing that the pathologist in his report has stated that Evans' death was accelerated by strangulation. Under cross-examination by the prosecuting counsel, all Brady would admit was, "I hit Evans with the axe. If he died from the axe blows, I killed him." Hindley denied any knowledge that the photographs of Saddleworth Moor found by police had been taken near the graves of their victims. The tape recording of Leslie Ann Downey, on which the voices of Brady and Hindley were clearly audible, were played in open court. Hindley admitted that her attitude towards the child was brusque and cruel, but claimed that was only because she was afraid that someone might hear Downey screaming. Hindley claimed that when Downey was being undressed, she herself was downstairs. When the pornographic photos were taken, she was looking out the window, and when the child was being strangled, she was running a bath. On May the 6th, after having deliberated for a little over 2 hours, the jury found Brady guilty of all 3 murders and Hindley guilty of the murders of Downey and Evans. The Murder Abolition of Death Penalty Act had come into force during the time that Brady and Hindley were held in prison, abolishing the death penalty for murder, and therefore the judge passed the only sentence that the law allowed, life imprisonment. Brady was sentenced to 3 concurrent life sentences and Hindley was given 2. Plus a concurrent 7-year term for harbouring Brady in the knowledge that he had murdered John Kilbride. Brady was taken to Durham Prison and Hindley was sent to Holloway Prison. In his closing remarks, Mr. Justice Atkinson described the murders as a truly horrible case and condemned the accused as 2 sadistic killers of the utmost depravity. He recommended that both Brady and Hindley spend a very long time in prison before being considered for parole, but did not stipulate a tariff. He stated that Brady was wicked beyond belief and that he saw no reasonable possibility of reform. He did not consider the same was necessarily true of Hindley once she was removed from Brady's influence. Throughout the trial, Brady and Hindley stuck rigidly to their strategy of lying, and Hindley was later described as a quiet, controlled, and passive witness who lied remorselessly. Immediately following their trial, Hindley lodged an unsuccessful appeal against her conviction. Brady and Hindley corresponded by letter until 1971, when she ended their relationship. The two remained in sporadic contact for several months, but Hindley had met and fallen in love with one of her prison officers, Patricia Cairns. In November 1986, Winnie Johnson, Keith Bennet's mother, wrote a letter to Hindley begging to know what had happened to her son, a letter that Hindley seemed to be genuinely moved by. The letter ended, "I am a simple woman. I work in the kitchens of Christie's Hospital. It has taken me 5 weeks' labour to write this letter because it is so important to me that it is understood by you for what it is, a plea for help. Please, Miss Hindley, help me." Police visited Hindley, then being held in Cookham Wood, a few days after she had received the letter, and although she refused to admit any involvement in the killings, she agreed to help by looking at photographs and maps to try and identify spots that she had visited with Brady. She showed particular interest in the photographs of the area around Hollenbaum Mill and Shiny Brook, but said that it was impossible to be sure of the locations without visiting them all. The security considerations for such a visit were significant. There were threats made against her should she visit the moors, but the Home Secretary Douglas Hurd agreed with Topping that it would be worth the risk. Writing in 1989, Topping said he felt quite cynical about Hindley's motivation in helping the police. Although the letter from Winnie Johnson may have played a part, he believed that Hindley's real concern was knowing of Brady's precarious mental state. She was afraid that he might decide to cooperate with the police. I wanted to make certain that she, and not Brady, was the one to gain whatever benefit there may have been in terms of public approval. Hindley made the first of 2 visits to assist the police search of Saddleworth Moor on the 16th of December 1986. 4 police cars left Cookham Wood at 4:30 a.m. At about the same time, police closed all roads onto the moor, which were patrolled by 200 officers, 40 of them armed. Hindley and her solicitor arrived by helicopter from an airfield near Maidstone, touching down at 8:30 a.m. Wearing a donkey jacket and a balaclava, she was driven and walked around the area. It was difficult for Hindley to make a connection between her memories of the area and what she saw on the day. She was apparently nervous of the helicopters flying overhead. At 3 p.m, she was returned to the helicopter, taken back to Cookham Wood. Topping was criticised by the press, who had described the visit as a fiasco and a publicity stunt, and also a mindless waste of money. He was forced to defend the visit, pointing out its benefits. Topping continued to visit Hindley in prison, along with her solicitor Michael Fisher and her spiritual counsellor, the Reverend Peter Timms, who had been a prison governor before resigning to become a minister in the Methodist Church. Go on, give out.
Just a spiritual counsellor. That's bullshit, isn't it? Like I'm not gonna lie. That's just like, ooh, I'll pretend to go all Christian and find Jesus so I can get a little bit of parole. It fucks me off. So many of them do it. I found Jesus. It's like, did you? What you thought is it's getting a bit boring in here, and I need a break.
That Bundy did it, didn't he? He did that interview at the end of his, like, when he was just about to die, saying that it was pornography that had made him do it and stuff like that.
And then you get this whole thing, don't you? Like with that, it's just like, oh, pornography is like bad because, like, oh, for fuck, it just bugs me. It bugs me to hell. Like, oh, she got a spiritual counselor, and her spiritual counselor. It's like, no, wait. It's like the spiritual counselor's got a dog in this fight, and she's got a dog in this fight. She wants to have a nice wander round, and he wants to think he's just chalked another person up to Jesus. So it's like, you're not getting anywhere with that, are you? It's like, oh, we've got another convert, Myra Hindley, like the infamous murderer. And she's like, I don't give a shit about Jesus. I can have a like bit of downtime. It winds me up. Anyway, sorry, continue. I've interrupted enough during this.
You don't interrupt, you are a valued contributor to this duo.
I try, folks. I try.
Police visited Brady in prison again and told him of Hindley's confession, at which first he refused to believe. Once presented with some of the details that Hindley had provided of Pauline Reed's abduction, he decided that he too was prepared to confess, but on one condition, that immediately afterwards he was given means to commit suicide, a request that was impossible for the authorities to comply with. About the same time, Winnie Johnson sent Hindley another letter, again pleading with her to assist the police in finding the body of her son Keith. In the letter, Johnson was sympathetic to Hindley over the criticism surrounding her first visit. Hindley, who had not replied to the first letter, responded by thanking Johnson for both letters, explaining that her decision not to reply to the first resulted from the negative publicity that surrounded it. She claimed that, had Johnson written to her 14 years earlier, she would have confessed and helped the police. She also paid tribute to Topping and thanked Johnson for her sincerity. Hindley made her second visit to the moor in March 1987. This time, the level of security surrounding her visit was considerably higher. She stayed overnight in Manchester at the flat of the police chief in charge of the GMP training at Sedgley Park and visited the moor twice. She confirmed to the police that two areas in which they were concentrating their search, Holland Brown Knoll and Hoe Green, were correct, although she was unable to locate either of the graves. She did later remember, though, as Pauline Reed was buried, she had been sitting next to her on a patch of grass and could see the rocks of Holland Brown Knoll silhouetted against the night sky. In April 1987, news of Hindley's confession became public. Amidst strong media interest, Lord Longford pleaded for her release, writing that her continuing detention to satisfy mob emotion was not right. Fisher persuaded Hindley to release a public statement in which she explained her reasons for denying her complicity in the murders, her religious experiences in prison, the letter from Johnson, that she saw no possibility of release. She also exonerated David Smith from any part in the murders, except that of Edward Evans. Over the next few months, interest in the search waned, but Hindley's clue had directed the police to focus their efforts on a specific area. On the afternoon of the 1st of July 1987, after more than 100 days of searching, they found a body laying in a shallow grave 3 feet below the surface, only 100 yards from the place where Leslie Ann Downey had been found. Brady had been cooperating with the police for some time, and when news reached him that Reed's body had been discovered, made a formal confession to Topping. He also issued a statement to the press through his solicitor saying he too was prepared to help the police in their search. Brady was taken to the moor on 3rd of July, but he seemed to lose his bearings, blaming changes that had taken place in the intervening years, and the search was called off at 3 p.m, by which time a large crowd of press and television reporters had gathered on the moor. Topping refused to allow Brady a second visit to the moors, and a few days after his visit, Brady wrote a letter to the BBC television reporter Peter Gould, giving some sketchy details of 5 additional murders that he claimed to have carried out. Brady refused to identify his alleged victims, and the police failed to discover any unsolved crimes matching the few details that he supplied. Hindley told Topping that she knew nothing of these killings. On 24th of August 1987, police called off their search of Saddleworth Moor, despite not having found Keith Bennet's body. Brady was taken to the moor for a second time on the 1st of December, but he once again unable to locate the burial site. Keith Bennet's body remains undiscovered to this day, although his family does search the moor over 40 years after his disappearance. On 15th November 2002, aged 60, Hindley died from bronchial pneumonia at West Suffolk Hospital. She was a 40-a-day smoker who in 1999 had been diagnosed with angina and hospitalised after suffering a brain aneurysm. Camera crews stood rank and file behind steel barriers outside, but none of Hindley's relatives were among the small congregation of 8 to 10 people who attended a short service at Cambridge Crematorium. Such was the strength of feeling more than 35 years after the murders that a reported 20 local undertakers refused to handle her cremation. 4 months later, her ashes were scattered by her ex-partner, Patricia Cairns, less than 10 miles away from Saddleworth Moors in Stalybridge Country Park. Following his conviction, Brady was moved to Durham Prison, where he asked to live in solitary confinement. He spent 19 years in mainstream prisons before he was declared criminally insane in November 1985 and sent to the high-security Ashworth Psychiatric Hospital. He made it clear that he did not want to be released. The trial judge had recommended that his life sentence should mean life, and successive Home Secretaries have agreed with that decision. In 1982, the Lord Chief Justice Lord Lane said of Brady, "This is the case if ever there is to be one where a man should stay in prison till he dies." After Brady began a hunger strike in 1999, he was force-fed, fell ill, and was transferred to another hospital for tests. He recovered and in March 2000 asked for a judicial review of the decision to force-feed him, but was refused permission. In contrast to the common belief that serial killers often continue with their crimes until they are caught, Brady claimed that in 2005 that the Moors murders were merely an existential exercise of just over a year, which was concluded in December 1964. By then, he went on to claim he and Hindley had turned their attention to armed robbery, for which they had begun to prepare by acquiring guns and vehicles. In 2001, Brady wrote The Gates of Janus, which was published by Feral House, an underground US publisher. The book, Brady's analysis of serial murder and specific serial killers, sparked outrage when announced in Britain. Winnie Johnson, the mother of the undiscovered victim, 12-year-old Keith Bennet, received a letter from Brady at the end of 2005 in which she said he claimed that he could take police to within 20 yards of her son's body, but the authorities would not allow it. Brady did not refer directly to Keith by name and did not claim he could take investigators directly to the grave, but spoke of the clarity of his recollections. In early 2006, prison authorities intercepted a package addressed to Brady from a female friend, containing 50 paracetamol pills, a potentially lethal dose, inside a hollowed-out crime novel. In 2012, Brady applied to be returned to prison, reiterating his desire to starve himself to death. At a mental health tribunal in June the following year, Brady claimed that he had not suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, as his doctors at Ashworth maintained, but a personality disorder. His application was rejected, and the judge stated that Brady continues to suffer from mental disorder, which is of a nature and degree which makes it appropriate for him to continue to receive medical treatment. After receiving end-of-life care, Brady died of restrictive pulmonary disease at Ashworth Hospital on the 15th of May 2017. The inquest found that he died of natural causes and that his hunger strike had not been a contributory factor. Brady had refused food and fluids for more than 48 hours on various occasions, causing him to be fitted with a nasogastric tube, although his inquest noted that the body mass index was not a cause for concern. He was cremated without ceremony and his ashes disposed of at sea during the night. So guys, that's the Moors murders there. As you know, it is a harrowing tale, mostly for Keith Bennet's mum, who has passed on, and I saw TV interviews with her where she just wanted to be buried next to him. She just wanted to give him a proper burial.
It's so sad. It is so sad. For me, that was a major part of her life. There was a part of her that knew her son was dead, but she just wanted closure. And imagine that, going through your life and not getting any closure.
And literally writing letters begging the murderers of your son to tell you where he is.
And then they just used it as an opportunity for a day trip, didn't they? That's what they did.
Oh yeah, Hindley used it, in my opinion, to try and curry favour with parole board, and Brady, fuck knows what he was on about. He was certifiably insane.
It's just like a power trip. What I don't get is how can you, as a murderer, get something like that?
I think he knew where it was, but when he said the murders were an exercise in existentialism, that gives you an insight into his brain of, just dismissing these murders, gives you an idea of his thoughts on humans. The only word you can use is disgusting. Not only is it a horrific case, it's sort of one that's ingrained in British society, which different from things like the Yorkshire Ripper when he was murdering prostitutes, because this was children and it was a couple who did it. I think it sort of blew everybody's mind, and I know there was cause to bring back the death penalty for him. Guys, please let me know what you think of that. Obviously, I don't think any of you are going to defend it because you're all decent humans, but let us know what your thoughts are. Do you think they should have been let out on the moors? And what are your thoughts on not being able to find Keith Bennet's body? As we always say, please subscribe to our channel. Please share the videos with everyone. If it's your first time, thank you very much for watching us. I've been Jan from Film Daddy. This has been Les from Tales from the Hangman, and we shall see you next time. Take care now.